The Tallarico Group has helped CEOs grow their sales and their leaders for over a decade. Founder Bill Tallarico brings you Total Growth, a podcast that explores the challenges of selling, leading, and building great relationships. Today's episode is a bit different. Rather than speaking with leaders in the sales world, Bill traveled to Toronto, Ohio to speak with two leaders in faith about their journey to finding their true vocation. The episode contains some of the most impactful and profound discussions we've had since starting Total Growth, and I highly advise people of any creed, religion, or vocation to give it a listen.
Well, welcome back to the Total Growth Podcast. Today's a pretty special day for me because I'm here with a couple friends today that I've known for a long time and admire greatly. I'm with Sister Agnes, Torres, and Sister Rita, Clara, both of the Franciscan Sisters TOR in Toronto, Ohio. Good afternoon.
Good to be here, Bill.
Thanks so much. We were talking recently, and so much of the work we do in our practice with leaders is built around true, authentic leadership. And we were saying how that comes from understanding your true vocation as a leader. And, who better to talk to about true vocation than you guys? And you're embracing of that. And we were on the phone the other day when we were bouncing ideas around. You guys were saying how you'd love to share that story with listeners. So let's start there. Sister Agnes, would you tell us a little bit about your vocation story and how we came to today?
Yeah, sure. So I wasn't actually raised Catholic, so it wasn't ever like, oh, I'm going to be a nun when I grow up. But then when I became Catholic in high school and then in college, I actually was challenged to pray. I was starting to run, and my running partner would sometimes cancel on me. And so I'd say, why?
I could have been one of those running partners. I would have never shown up.
But this was her otherwise reliable person. Yeah. So she said, well, I have to go pray. That's why I can't run. I said, there's enough time for both. It's not like an either or kind of thing. And she said, you can tell me that when you pray for an hour a day, because that's what I do. And of course, I was like, oh, fine, I can pray for an hour a day too then. Yeah, right. And God
little
uses...
competitive.
Exactly. Huh? God even uses arrogance, competition, all of it. He's resourceful. So I started praying an hour a day, and it was in that prayer, in that silence, in the Lord's Eucharistic presence that I remembered that he's not just a rule book in the sky, but that he's the one who loves me best, who knows me best, and has plans for me that are trustworthy because of that love. So I started being like, okay, it's not about do I get my PhD in philosophy or Spanish? There might be deeper questions here. And yeah, just really wanting to give my life to God after that.
That's beautiful. It's funny. I always tell people when I get to come and visit you guys here, I told Evan, our producer today, I said, when you leave, you're going to want to be a nun. And it's because of that joy that you can reflect in that story. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Mm-hmm. Sister Rita, Clara, tell us a little bit about your vocation story.
Yeah, well, I was taught by Franciscan nuns my whole life, but I never wanted to be one either. But I did say if I were one, I would be a really cool, fun nun. So there was, I guess, always a little thought in the back of my mind. But yeah, it really wasn't until I was 23 years old and had a reversion through a homily and went back to confession for the first time in 10 years that my heart started opening up to freedom with the Lord and prayer, and started going to Eucharistic adoration and reading my Bible. And it was on a pilgrimage to Rome and Assisi outside of St. Clare's Basilica. I was looking at the San Damiano cross, and I heard the Lord say to me, when I walked out of the church, all the Poor Clare nuns were walking into the church, and I heard the Lord say to me, you should do this, you could do this. And I was like, do what? Become a nun? At the time, I was playing women's professional football. I was working as a personal trainer for athletes, and I kind of had one foot in the bar and one foot in the church. I was loving my conversion and learning everything about the faith, but I was not ready to give up my old way of life. And the Lord called me right then and there, and I knew what it meant. And so that was a 3-year journey of running away from him before I finally decided I can't run from God. He's a little faster than I am.
As you've grown in that vocation, which changed, when you look back, how are you different today than you were in Assisi and you were when you were waiting for your running partner and being challenged to pray for an hour a day?
Yeah. I mean, I think a big part of it is that, finding your state of life vocation is in some ways just the first step. it's just a tiny part of what God has for us, because it's not like, oh, well, man, I've found my convent, so I can just kick back now, or oh, I'm in first vows, so I can just kick back now, or oh, I'm in final vows, so I've arrived. But rather that every stage, every step in life is an opportunity for like a deeper awareness of the vocation that God is calling me to, not just the general vocation, like, oh, you're going to be a nun, or even you're going to be a sister here, but what does God have for me? Like, what is his name for me? What is the place that he's calling me to in this community that nobody else can do?
Yeah, that's such a powerful statement. What's his name for me?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, when I work with people, when I work with executives and leaders, so often they're wearing a mask.
Yeah.
And I think that when we live in society, we put on these masks, and, one day you wake up and you're like, who am I? And I was exchanging a note yesterday with a leader I work with, and he was forced to do some self-reflection and write an essay about this board role he was pursuing. And he said, I think I know these things intuitively, but I've never had to put them on paper. And he said, this introspection's tough. I said, yeah, looking in the mirror can be tough, especially if you don't know the person looking back. Right? And I think that too few of us spend time being still in the outside world. So that
Amen.
Stillness is necessary to know who you are. How have you guys grown in seeing your authentic self? Because, another mutual friend of ours is Father Boniface Hicks. And Father Boniface taught me the definition of humility is seeing yourself as God sees you, or seeing yourself as you truly are. So how have you guys grown over the years in your humility, if you will, of seeing yourself as you truly are?
Slowly.
Yeah, well, I mean...
You're very proud of how humble you are at this point, right?
But yeah, we would like to believe we're less arrogant than when we were 22 and received our callings. But talking about the masks and how we've grown since the Lord's called us to, like, I've grown a lot more sober, and my mask was drinking, because you could hide from everything and just, you weren't aware, because you didn't have to look in the mirror because you couldn't see.
Yeah, it's medication.
So grown by taking those masks off, and every time the Lord called me, it was a time that I was still and in silence and in a place of prayer. And so that was the only time he could speak. And I do feel like, my name for the Lord has given me is bride and light. And so if everything I'm doing is not allowing me and having me look like and be bride and light to the whole world, then I'm not doing what I was created to do. And so, our vocation that for the whole world that no one else can do. And mine is to be bride and light no matter where I am or what I'm doing. And so, everything has to come back to that. And there can be no masks with either of those two things.
Yeah. And
I can't take the veil off. I'm always bride.
Well, and like that's the thing too, is like that with masks, like, intoxication can be a mask, but so can sobriety. And I think for me, it's been the process of like, okay, like, in growing up, okay, the good girl mask, that had to go. But then like I have to learn how to take off the good nun mask. That I'm not, like, sometimes it's safer to be a generic good nun than it is to be Sister Agnes Torres, And so for me, it's that constant just coming back to the Lord every day, every hour, and just like, okay, Lord, am I being real here, or am I hiding behind my veil? Am I hiding behind my habit? Or am I revealing you, or am I hiding you?
Yeah. So to get to that stillness, for you guys, it's easy for people like me to point fingers and say, it's really easy for you, because like, what else do you have to do, right? You have plenty of time to be still, and you could spend an hour in front of the Eucharist easily. It's tougher for me.
Yeah.
Right? And part of that's a mask and a lie, because I think that I always tell my kids I get on them about phones, and looking at the phones. But then I realize that I'm addicted. And I can't tell you how much time I've wasted. And one of the things I've been struggling with is, did I give time to God? Did I give time to me? Did I give enough time to my family? Did I give it commensurate with the time I spent on my phone? And there's these apps now that you could see screen time, and you're like, whoa,
wow,
how much time did I spend on this? And it's easy to lie and rationalize and say, well, I was emailing, or I was doing it. I'm not. So, what are some of the challenges you guys have to find that stillness too? Because it's funny, you live in community with 34 people, right? 34 other sisters. So it's not easy all the time.
Yeah.
You have prescribed prayer time, but how do you guys manage to find that important time for you to keep growing and to be that light?
Yeah, I think it doesn't matter where you are or what you're doing or who you are, what your vocation is. You can find a distraction. You can find a flip phone in the convent to use. And living with 34 people, for me, is a huge distraction because people are a huge distraction for me. So it's basically, like you said, there's no excuses. If you want to do it and you need to do it, you got to do it and you got to make time. But then, even though we have it prescribed in our way of life and we're all there together every morning, 5:30 to 6:30 a.m. for a holy hour in silence, it's like so other people say sometimes, well, I don't know if she was actually meditating.
Right.
What was she really?
Yeah.
So it's that stillness of heart. Like she said, every hour of the day she comes back to the Lord and asks him, like, am I living my vocation? We could spend a whole hour in prayer, distracted, running through our own thoughts and not actually be still. So everyone has trouble sometimes being still, no matter where you are.
I was used to say that my purgatory is going to be watching myself watch all of the reruns of Law and Order that I watched. And like all the ones that I saw multiple times, I'm going to have to watch them. I'm going to have to watch myself watch them multiple times.
And say, where did that time go? Right?
Yeah.
What could I have done with that
Oh my
time?
gosh, yeah.
And that's the thing that drives me nuts is, the gift of time. And it's such a precious gift, and I don't think I always use it right. I don't use it well. And that's something that so many leaders struggle with too.
And before I entered, it was back in the day when like you used to buy the phone plan that had like 600 minutes and 30 texts or something. And I always got charged over like $200 because I always went over my minutes and it was right before I was entering the convent. And so when I looked at my bill, I just had a revelation one day. I was like, oh my gosh. Like you said, I'm spending this much time talking to other people. How much time a day am I spending talking to the Lord? And so I gave up like twice a week using my phone completely for, because it's that comparison of like who deserves more of your time.
Yeah, and it's about intentionality. Like what am I trying to do here? That's what I've been starting to ask myself. Like, okay, like I have this little second. Maybe I have like a 2.5 minute, just precious bubble of unclaimed time. And what can I do? I can jump on my email and try to feel good about myself there.
Right.
I can jump on the news and feel good that I'm not as bad as everyone else. or despair. I can do either of those things on any given day.
Today, that's easy to do.
Yeah. Or I can say, I'm just going to retreat into my inner heart where God dwells. And I'm going to tap into the source of my life and remember who loves me best and let that be enough for me right now. Rather than frantically, maybe I'll pop down the hallway and find someone to say a nice thing to me. Rather than looking around everywhere else for something to make me feel like important or good or valued.
Yeah.
To just say, I actually have everything I need dwelling in my heart because the Trinity's there. Yeah. And so if I can be quiet enough to hear that voice, I don't need anything else.
Yeah. So that comment you made about running down the hall and trying to find someone to make you feel good about yourself, I'm telling you, so many of us live our lives that way, and I am the biggest culprit, right, of rationalizing why I can't be quiet. Because in that moment, for me, it's easy to say, well, I need to go see this person, and I need to be there for that person, or I need to, right? And that's a lie. I'm doing it for me, and I'm doing it to avoid the reflection, the inner look, right? Because I'm a little scared of what you find when you look in the mirror. And then if you look inside, that could get really scary, and we're reminded of all the demons we might fight or the things we've done wrong. And it's so wrong because we don't need to do that, And I think that so many people, how much happier could we be if instead of running in circles, if we could find that stillness, and you used the word intentionality, which over the past year or so has become like my favorite word. It's amazing when you said that. I was
happy to throw it out there for you.
Thanks. Yeah. And I didn't even pay you to do that. But there's, that intentionality lacks. And I've been wrestling with, and a lot of the coaching I've been doing with our clients has been around, are we living accidental lives or are we living intentional lives? And with both of you doing a lot of the counseling you do for others, and Sister Rita, Clara being on a college campus where you get to see a lot of accidental living, right? How can we live more intentional lives?
I think, planning like we plan everything else, planning that silence, planning that prayer time. And like she was saying, that everything I need is inside of me in that inner dwelling. Once we allow the students to have an experience like that and they do it day after day, going to prayer, their lives change. And so just making, some people would say, I would never make someone pray. But when I get on them and coach them, they never turn back. They never turn back. And so some people will say, I've been meeting with this person for 6 months and they're still not praying. And I'm like, I tell them they're not going to meet with me unless they are praying. And then they have to, And so if we go there with people, and I just listening to her talk about the inner dwelling, unless someone has done a weekend silent retreat, how would they know that everything they need
how
is
do you find
inside
that
of
place?
them? You would never
Right.
know.
Right.
So just, intentionally going to a place of silence, whether it's for a weekend or every day for an hour, it's the only way. But you need a coach for that. I mean, who's going to do that on their own?
Yeah,
Right.
because I really think that what we are most afraid of, and I say we, because I mean every sister in the convent, I mean every person. I think what we're afraid of is we're going to go to that quiet place, we're going to go to our hearts, and there's not going to be anything there. And we're going to look for God and we're going to wait for him and he's not going to answer. I think that that's the real fear, is that there really isn't anything there.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where we have to, we become intentional by ordering our loves. So St. Augustine says, my love is my weight. So what I love is my center of gravity. So most of us have about 15 centers of gravity.
Yeah.
And that's a hard way to live.
Yes, I can tell you it is.
And, it causes a lot of bouncing and vacillation, right? And so basically the goal of my life is to have one love, is to have, God be my center of gravity. And when we do that, like you said with the students, once they start to realize that that's actually what they want and what they're looking for, because they've given it a shot, they do it naturally. They don't give up prayer. I had the most beautiful experience. I was working with someone, and this person had been a faithful prayer in the past, and then maybe had a little bit more, they were in a busy time of life and were a little bit less regular in their prayer life. And after we had been working together for a while and she was praying all the time, every day, she said, I used to worry, I'm not witnessing to Jesus very much in my life. And she said, but since I've been praying regularly, I don't even have to think about evangelizing people or telling people about God, because he's always on my mind. So I'm always sharing about him. Yeah. And for me, that's the voice of someone whose love is their weight and their center of gravity is God. And so their heart is always with him. And so they're going to talk about him, if they're on the street or whatever, home, work, wherever.
And live him, right?
Yes, exactly.
And I guess, we could debate whether St. Francis actually said it or not, but it sounds good. And then, preach the gospel constantly and use words when you must. Mm-hmm. But as you were talking about that being ordered, right? I think that so much of what we see, so many folks we interact with have become disordered.
Yeah.
Right? And because, looking at the true root of the word, disordered mean having lack of an order to our thoughts or our beliefs.
Welcome to the fallen human race.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and I think this COVID time has given us a time to look at our priorities, look at how much we want to do, and less is more. And I think some people are realizing that towards God, and some people are getting more disordered because there's less to do. Less
structure even, right? And the more, it's funny because through this time, it's been a very powerful time for us as a family because we've been together, and in the first week it was all cool because we're going to have game night, and everything's new and fun. And then by the third week, everybody's miserable. And they're I just want to go see somebody, and
someone other than you.
Right. Yeah, they say that daily. That's the beauty of having teenagers. But we found ourselves coming much closer to each other around simple things. And it was, we always try to eat together, but it was so cool to have when Susie would come to the office some days to do the things she does, she comes in the office about 2 days a week. Gina started calling our 16-year-old saying, I'm going to make dinner tonight.
Oh.
And it's funny because there's that balance between like, okay, that's great. And well, wait, when you say you're going to make dinner, what do you mean? Like, what are you going to cook? And then what are you going to use to cook it? And is the house going to still be standing? And it's been these incredible experiments and trust, right? And being forced to trust more. And I'm a big fan of trust. One of my things that I focus on in my spiritual life is trustful surrender. But I think we've all had to do some of trustful surrender during these COVID times, right? And try to understand more. And what I've seen is the people who have done well through this and are coming out of this better on the back end have been okay with that uncertainty. By having the proper order to their life, they're a little better with the uncertainty versus those who are struggling more because they don't have that weight, as you talked about, the center of gravity that holds them. Have you guys seen some of that either here or, I know you've been in quarantine.
Well, the students at Florida State, when coronavirus hit, they were like, wow, the sisters and the brothers, the religious brothers that we work with, their lives haven't changed because they still get up at the same time every day. They still pray their holy hour. They still have mass in their, quarantine houses, the convents. And they're still able to do nothing has changed for them, and except for that we were in one building basically, and it was a witness to them that we already had our priorities straight, and so nothing fell out from underneath us, where their whole lives were rocked, obviously.
So it's funny because I would say you guys live a pretty intentional life, right? And having that intentional life set before chaos hit allowed you to continue being intentional versus having the accidental life. And now you throw chaos into there, and what happens? Well, we saw alcohol sales hit all-time highs during 30 and 60 days following Corona. Probably not a great stat, right? But it's important, I guess, for us to now be thinking about getting that intentionality set so that the rocks are there, the anchors are there when you need them.
Yeah, when the storms come, the house doesn't fall down.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I always I don't know if you've heard the story of Father Walter Chiswick, but he was a Pennsylvania man who became a Jesuit and ended up being a priest behind the Iron Curtain in Russia.
Oh, wow.
Amazing story. Read it. With God in Russia and He Leadeth Me are his books. But one thing that's amazing about his life is that he was just a regular Pennsylvania boy, actually kind of like a tough. He got in trouble growing up, and then when he was in seminary, he would just do crazy things like he fasted on bread and water for all of Lent just to see if he could, or he'd swim every day in the lake through the winter just to prove that he was that strong. And on one level, it's what a bizarre thing. But then all of those experiences were what made him strong enough to endure 10 plus years of hard labor in Siberia.
Wow.
And God was preparing him. I've run a couple of marathons, and I always think about the spiritual life in terms of marathon training. You don't run a marathon every day.
Yeah.
But you're always ready for the race day. You don't, and with our lives, with our lives as they are, we don't know when marathon day is. It could be today, it could be in a week, it could be in 6 years. But I need to be ready to run my race, whatever that's going to look like, whatever, race God sets for me today. And we do that by this intentional life and by making God the anchor of everything.
And so when the cancer diagnosis comes or the death comes, you still have your, nothing has changed for you because God's still God, no matter what outside things come at you.
One of my favorite quotes of all time, I say this everywhere, but false religion tells us, all those things you're worried about, don't worry, they're not going to happen. True religion tells us, all those things you're worried about, they're probably going to happen, but they're not what you should be worried about.
Yeah, that's cool. Worrying about the wrong things. We oftentimes talk about controlling what we can control, right? And it's the simplest concept in the world. And I feel like I say it every day. On the left-hand side of the page, when you write down all the things you cannot control, and you're focused on those things, it drives up your stress and your anxiety, and it drives down your focus and performance. But being realistic about things that are going to happen and saying, okay, I can't control if I get cancer, but what I can control is my response to it. I can make sure that everybody knows I love them, whatever. And when you focus on those 3, 4, 5 things you can control, it drives down your stress and anxiety and drives up your focus and performance and peace. right?
Yes.
You know, because
Amen.
if peace is the opposite of anxiety, that's a good path to peace. And I think that so many in our culture seek peace, right, without knowing what they're seeking. So they end
Yeah.
up seeking all these things that bring anxiety. And, you know, how do you see that play out on a college campus? What are some of the themes of that you hear from young people, and then the medications they're taking to deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, just the anxiety of social media and how freeing they feel when they give it up for Lent, and how much they're just in a cycle of going back and forth between all these things, and how you feel more anxious when you're looking at all those things than when you actually just go read a book. And so, yeah, the anxiety of constantly going on a college campus and constantly being around people, like they have no privacy either. And so they're realizing now, because of coronavirus, when they went home, they weren't constantly busy. They started taking care of themselves. They started exercising. They started sleeping more and started eating healthier. And they're like, oh my gosh, I was completely miserable at college.
Yeah.
I'm not going back. I'm going to change. So it's hard to pull them out of the whirlwind when they're in the whirlwind, but it's been beautiful seeing them realize, oh my gosh, I can live differently.
Yeah, and
Even
find
though
some
they're
peace.
still living well as they could, well as they thought they could have, following Christ with all their heart, but not happy, not peaceful.
Yeah.
Because of all the external stuff that they weren't, letting roll off.
And which we don't think we can say no to.
Totally.
That's
Or live without.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, what's Matthew Kelly say? You can't get enough of the things you don't need.
Right?
Yep. And I think as
That's a good
humans,
one.
you just can't get enough of the things you don't need because they don't fill you. And Sister Agnes Torres, you're always working in a community with others too. And I don't know if you've seen differences during this time, but what are some of the themes you see of people coming to you with open hearts?
Yeah, I think, I just have been privileged to, a lot of the people that I talk to regularly are living very intentional lives. And the cool thing has been some of the responses like, I don't want to come through this the same. Or, yeah, people just sharing that, like, I'm living my best life right now in quarantine, like, and just really rejoicing in it, like it's like vacation.
I don't know if I'd go that far because I'm an extrovert. So, and my friend Sister Rita Clark over there, she's over there dying because she needs people, right? And we're similar that way. And it's funny how you've seen introverts versus extroverts.
Oh yeah.
Handle this time because introverts are like, living my best life, baby. I love this. Never have to go back into an office again. It's Zoom for me. And then the extroverts are just no energy. And we preach over and over to our clients how we have to be mindful of those who are extroverts and might be living alone, or extroverts who might be in isolation with 2 or 3 people.
Yes.
How do we make sure we're helping them fill up with energy sources, right? And I know for me, I think one of the struggles I have of finding energy inside is because I'm always so outwardly focused and don't take that time to be still. So it's, you go back to a reservoir that's empty. And I think that can improve with some intentionality probably, and some stillness.
Yeah, we learned in Novitiate that until your reservoir is full, you can't go out.
Yeah, can't give a gift you don't have, right? We always say. And one of the phrases that changed my life is you have to parent the child you have, not the one you want or the one you were, right? And you guys know my family, and my poor Dante, he'd be 6 and, I'd steal a cookie, and I'd go crazy on him because in my mind I saw the 18 or 19-year-old me doing beer bongs and things I shouldn't have done with, total lack of self-control. I think as people, we don't realize that we just have to love the person we are, not the one we want to be, right? Or the one we used to be, and just try to, and I don't know how you guys see that, or do you see people that lack the self-love, and how do you help somebody who's unhappy with maybe who they are and hides from it, or is afraid to find out who they truly are?
I think we get to listen to them because of our job of spiritual direction or just meeting with people. And when we listen to someone who's pouring out their heart and in a bad state, and we don't judge them and we just listen and love them, they realize I don't have to hate myself for these things, and because she doesn't hate me, and she should be, I would thought she'd be mad or judging me. So because of our response to people, they get to have self-love because we love them first, and it's just, and And we have to do that for ourselves every day before the Lord. So,
and I was just telling someone actually that being with people in spiritual direction is one of the hugest gifts in my life, because I see how lovable people are in their weakness and in their vulnerability. And so often, people, if someone's going to spiritual direction, they have like a growth mindset. They're trying to improve, they're trying to get strong or what have you. They have goals. And sitting there, I just feel like God gives you a little piece of his heart for the person in front of you. Mm-hmm. And I'm always just like, I don't think you need to worry so much. Like, you're great. Like, it's okay.
That's why we want her, right? That's why your calendar would be full, because that's all anybody wants to hear is you're great. Don't worry.
Yeah, but then I have to take that, and when I look at my own life where I'm ready, like, okay, like, time to get on this. I need to be more, whatever. Like, okay, wait, but that's not how the Lord feels about that person I was just sitting with. So that's probably not how he feels about me either.
Right.
So we have to take the heart. Like, Carol Houselander has this cool idea that, like, God reveals himself to us through our responses to the people we love. So, like, God shows us his fatherhood or his parenthood, by, like, evoking fatherly or motherly feelings in us. Like, you die for your kids.
Yeah.
And so that tells you something about God's love for you.
Yeah.
And so similarly, when you're sitting with someone and all you can do is just love them and see the good there, it's like, oh, like, that's how God loves me too. And that's also how he loves my sister.
Yeah. That's the hard one.
Why you point at her when you say that? Yeah, she seems lovable enough, right?
She's a pretty good one. Yeah.
And you mentioned vulnerable, and I noticed that the people we're most attracted to tend to be vulnerable and humble.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know if you've experienced that in some of the ministry work you guys do, but what do you notice about people who are vulnerable and humble versus those who are not?
Yeah, I mean, well, with our students, we teach them to live a life of testimony or witness, and so they're always getting up and giving witnesses to each other at our nights, and to see the crowd break down when someone who's, loud and popular shares about her past history and how hard it was, all of a sudden everyone's willing to go into the depths and be real with each other, not just be like externally fake.
Yeah. And real is the word. Yeah. I think that's what's attractive is, when we look around and we see people who are just like always giving this, impression of inviolability. What does vulnerable mean? It means able to be wounded, right? And that's every single one of us. That's the human condition.
Yeah.
Like, it's really easy to wound us. And so I think when we see someone who's vulnerable, we know they're real. Yeah. And we were talking about how life's too short for small talk.
Yeah, right.
Life's too short for invulnerability. Yeah. Like,
it's just a waste of time.
Yeah,
beating around the bush.
Because we're going to eventually get there, right?
Exactly.
Eventually, somebody discovers you're human, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And regardless, when we die, everything's going to be revealed.
That's right. I think that's part of this week's gospel. Actually, the upcoming Sunday, this Sunday's gospel says that. But it's funny because the vulnerability, the lack of vulnerability, I think stems from this place of what we need to project.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And one time I heard a priest say in a homily, everybody has a story. And it's amazing how when you share your story of failure, weakness, which doesn't make us weak, it just means we learned, hopefully, right? Because if we're not failing, probably not learning. So if we have these stories of failure along the way, when you share that with somebody in whatever realm of life it is, they instantly can connect to that as well. They instantly connect to that failure.
And that's why Jesus came to earth, became man, and died on a cross. It's like, you don't get weaker than that.
No.
You don't get weaker than being condemned as a criminal and executed publicly, falling 3 times on your way up the hill. Yeah. You don't get weaker than that. So, like, him sharing his story with us, it makes it okay for us to be as weak as we are.
It's what it means to be human, basically.
Mm-hmm.
To be weak, fail, and suffer and die.
And that's the bravest thing that there is. Mm-hmm. It's not brave to be strong.
Right, to artificially strong, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's and it's that false bravado that I think leads to so much unhappiness.
Mm-hmm.
So much brokenness, and it's amazing how easy it could be to, I leave here and I'm just always overwhelmed by the joy that you live and the joy that you share and the joy that's in your eyes and emanates from your heart. It seems so easy, right? I mean, it really does. It's like that joy seems so easy when you look at it, you're like, I could get that, you know, but yet we put all these things in our way that keep us from that joy.
Yeah.
And it's all that artificial stuff.
And that's why failure is our best friend. Like when I was in charge of the kitchen here at the Mother House, and it was like the worst assignment for me. I was dying. And Sister Rita Claire's dying right now because she knows how true it is. And I got to a point where like I kept trying to be strong in it. Like, no, I'm going to overcome my weakness. I'm going to overcome the difficulties I'm having, whatever, and make this a success. And I got to a point where it actually became the flip. Like every time I like hurt someone's feelings, every time I ruined a meal, every time I frustrated someone, it was like, well, that's one less hurdle to jump over. All right. Like life has just gotten a little bit easier, you know, and like embracing my weakness in it, that I wasn't going to do it perfectly, that I wasn't going to please everyone or impress anyone. Right. You know, that became like the happy way to live.
Yeah. You were talking about we were talking about the joy, right? And how we find joy. And how often do you find yourself with people that come to you and they seem so lost and seem so frustrated, yet the answer is literally like one step away from them? How do you maintain inspiration and encouragement in people to help them get there?
I mean, just imploring them that these things are true and that it will help you and that you can, you know, let go of these past sins or whatever that are holding you back from it, but really just staying with them in it because they have to come to it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. The words that came to me were like, you can't do the work for anyone.
Right.
And so often, like, yeah, like God just loves to use all of us in his work of bringing people to his full stature in Christ. And so like, I think about how God is with me and how he's so patient. Like oftentimes I am my own worst enemy and I'm impeding my own happiness. And like, you know, God could just like give me some sort of revelation so that I could like figure that out and get over it. But he waits with me instead. And he waits for me to be where, like, he's not impatient for me to take that step and get to happiness. Like, God loves me when I am thwarting my own best interest just as much as when I am succeeding in happiness.
And he waits for us to be ready to, like you said, reveal everything.
Yeah. And so, like, do I have the courage to wait with other people? Do I have the patience to be like God is with me?
And it's hard to watch someone you love suffer. And you know it way more than us as a blood parent.
It's so challenging to watch your kids make bad choices and to love them through it, right? And not fix it. And that's one of the great things I struggle with is empowering versus enabling. And I think we see that in a lot of parents and a lot of leaders. It is so easy to enable by just doing things for people or giving them the answers and shortcutting it versus empowering them to be able to do some of this on their own and empowering them to get better. And, you know, today in my men's group, we were talking and one of the guys had said, how awesome is it that God loves us so much that he lets us believe our life is our own, right? And that was one of those phrases that just hit me. And it's true. It's like, how do you let people know, yeah, you got this, but guide them to where you know they need to be. You know, keep them between the lines, and be able to be patient with them. Because I think empowering versus enabling comes down to patience. You know, we see the answers, and you see the answer right there, and you just want to tell somebody, do it this way, right? And then you're fine. Give them the recipe, give them the equation. But having the patience to ask them questions and lead them to it so they can own it is tough.
And it goes back to that question of vocation, because when I'm sitting with someone, I'm not sitting with someone who has the same vocation that I do, whether that's state of life or personal vocation. Right. So what I might think is the obvious answer might not actually be the answer for that person.
Right.
And that's so humbling, you know? Yeah. And it's been just a privilege to see people, you know, just who I've accompanied in different ways over the years where like I thought for sure, like, okay, like they're going to figure this out and it's going to go in this direction. And then something completely different happened. It was so clearly God. And I'm like, I don't know anything.
And it's such a fine line because of grace.
Yeah.
And the person has to be open. And so, prayer is so essential and response to grace is so essential. And the Lord respects that because we can avoid grace so easily. It's so easy to just let him roll off us, run away, and can't hear ya.
We're mystifying machines that way, aren't we? And I think that patience is, it's so hard to sometimes reflect. I struggle with that oftentimes, and I have to be intentional in wanting to extend grace to people. And I had a challenge with that yesterday, actually, where one of our partners, an IT partner of ours, they sent an email to someone else, and I felt like they threw me under the bus on an answer, and I had a choice to respond. And normally I would have responded and been like, hey, you know what, this isn't working out. We need you to be a partner, fired off a bad email. And instead I said, here's how you made me feel when I read that. And here's what that did. And I responded to this person with more love than I normally would have, and had an opportunity to have a great conversation with her today. Yeah. And she called and she apologized and she said, I'm so sorry. I didn't intend it that way. And yet, I have to be more intentional with that because my go-to is much more speed.
Oh, yeah.
And just flushing it out and not extending that love. But then I think I deserve it from everybody else, and I deserve the benefit of the doubt. So that's where it gets a little out of balance, right?
Yeah, I just read, don't call oversensitivity in someone else what you would call sensitivity in yourself.
and I think it's that seeing the other person as God would see them and treat them. That's like, that's it.
Yeah, and starting to really believe that they're as important as I am.
Yep. And he's as merciful with them as
he cares as much about that.
He can forgive
how about
more
that
of their
for
sins
dignity
than he can forgive of yours.
Yeah, think about that. When you talk about the dignity of each individual, and I've never phrased it that way, but recognizing they're actually as important as I am. And for some of us, that's a little hard to believe, But I think that...
And even going as far as the homeless person on the street that we were talking about earlier.
Right.
Like, they are as important as you.
Yeah. That's amazing. And, we're living in some difficult times right now, obviously, with a lot of the turmoil. We went through COVID, and now we're watching cities go through a lot of chaos. And when you guys see that, I think you see it from a different perspective than many of us who are on the outside, so to speak. But what do you see when you see it? I mean, what do you feel in your heart, and what do you hear in your heart?
Yeah, I mean, I think my heart breaks.
Yeah.
And I think what it does is it calls me like, do I have any enemies? Because what we're seeing is not like, all of a sudden people are enemies with each other.
Right.
It's a manifestation of what was just simmering beneath the surface. Yeah. And just worlds of hurt that are being exposed, and it's like pus in a wound. So what it makes me do is look at my life and say, okay, like, what sister do I need to reconcile with?
Yeah.
Or do I need to just change my heart or ask the Lord to change my heart towards, because every act of peace, reconciliation, and unity that I choose in my little world, it affects spiritually the whole world. And so believing that living as a person of peace myself actually is changing the world. And refusing to have any enemies. That's why I love St. Francis. Like, he didn't have any enemies. Even his brothers who betrayed him, even the Sultan whom he tried to convert, even the wolf at Gubbio, he didn't have any enemies. And I think we can say the same thing of Jesus. Even when he says hard words towards the Pharisees, it's so that he can bring them close. So I think that's been a big response for me, is just to let my heart be broken about it, and then out of that broken heart to try to make room for everyone, especially the people just in my milieu. I can't make a difference in New York City, or in Chicago.
Right.
But hopefully I can make a little difference here.
Yeah. I think I often have said, when we look at Mother Teresa, right? When she'd walk out of the door, I look at homelessness, and my daughter talks about homelessness, and she says, "Oh, why does this have to be?" And in my mind, I'm like, "Yeah, you're right. We need to start a foundation, and we need to raise money,
Yeah.
and we need to build something and everything. And then I come back to, well, what would Mother Teresa do when she walked out of her door and saw a homeless person? Well, like, she'd go love them, right? And just hug them and love them and let them feel important and let them know they're loved. And it's so much easier to not get involved and get messy with people when we see them having problems, to just say, like, oh, I can rectify this, I can start something or put a process in place and everything. But it's that movement of the heart, I think, that is actually what's important.
And it's easy to look and say, like, why can't they get along?
Right. Why can't they
and
fix
then,
this?
like, go to dinner and be like, why can't I get along? Like, the thing that I feel hurt about right now is, like, maybe some, like, stupid comment someone made a couple days ago.
Yeah.
Not, like, systemic injustice.
Right.
You know? So it just, you know, causes that perspective shift. Like, okay, who's the problem here? Maybe it's actually just me.
If we could just fix us, the world would be better.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll work on that one tonight. We should have this problem solved by 5.
Yeah, let me know how it goes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you guys so much for your time today. It's always such a joy being with you. And as I say, every time I leave, I'm always filled with more joy than when I came. And so thank you so much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
your time.
You're such a gift to us.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
that. God bless you guys. And as I said earlier, if you want to find true joy and you want to find true peace, find yourself a Franciscan sister and visit their website, learn more about them. And the website is franciscansisters.tor.org, right? So Franciscan Sisters, all spelled out, TOR, which stands for Third Order Regular.
Well done.
.org. And visit them, and please, if you can, support their mission and support them with your prayers and any other way you can. So thank you guys.
Thank you, Bill.
Take care. God bless.
God bless.